The morning sun rose gently over the quiet town and its rays spread across the cobblestone streets where dew still rested upon the grass. Life in this little town usually followed the same pattern each day. People walked to their shops. Children hurried to school. Farmers led their carts filled with vegetables. Everything seemed ordinary, yet inside each life there were hidden stories waiting to be told. Ethan was a young man who worked at a small bookstore near the town square. His days were not filled with excitement. Instead, he spent his time arranging shelves and dusting covers of books that many customers rarely touched. He had no wealth and no great ambitions, yet he carried within him a heart that noticed little details. If someone walked into the store with a tired face, he offered a gentle smile. If an elderly man asked for help finding a title, he guided him with patience. Ethan did not consider these small gestures important, yet his heart felt lighter whenever he gave them. On that particular morning, Ethan left his house early. The air was fresh and the sound of birds echoed above the roofs. He enjoyed walking rather than rushing. As he passed the bakery, he greeted the old baker who stood by the door. The smell of warm bread made the street feel alive. Ethan reached the bookstore and opened its wooden door that creaked as if it had grown older than the building itself. He swept the floor and placed new arrivals on display. Soon the clock struck 9 and customers began to arrive. Around noon the sunlight had grown brighter and the square was filled with movement. A stranger entered the shop. He wore clothes that looked worn out and his shoes carried dust from long travel. His face showed fatigue and sadness, yet his eyes still held a spark as if he was searching for something. Ethan looked up from the counter and greeted him warmly. The stranger asked if he could sit for a while. Ethan nodded and pointed to the chair near the window. The man lowered himself slowly as though his body carried the weight of many struggles. For a moment he remained silent and Ethan respected that silence. After a while the man asked if there was any work available. His voice was tired yet polite. Ethan explained that the bookstore did not need extra help, but he offered him a glass of water. The man drank with gratitude. His hands trembled slightly as he held the glass. Ethan noticed but did not ask questions. Instead he brought him a small piece of bread he had saved from his breakfast. The man hesitated before taking it, yet hunger was stronger than pride. He ate slowly, savoring each bite. When he finished he whispered a thank you that sounded heavier than a simple word. Ethan did not realize that this moment would begin a chain of changes. He simply felt that helping someone was natural. He asked the stranger about his name. The man replied that he was called James and that he had been traveling for many days in search of work. He had lost his family farm due to debt and had nothing left. He walked from village to village hoping to rebuild his life, but most doors remained closed. Hearing his story, Ethan felt a deep sense of compassion. Though he could not provide him with employment, he thought of a solution. He knew the bakery often needed help carrying flour sacks. Ethan decided to speak with the baker. He left James in the shop and quickly went across the street. The baker listened and agreed to give James a chance for a few days. When Ethan returned with this news, James's eyes filled with tears. He placed his hand over his heart and said that he had not expected kindness from a stranger. The following day James began working at the bakery. Though the work was hard, he performed it with dedication. The baker soon noticed his honesty and decided to keep him permanently. Within a week James was earning enough to buy simple meals. He found a small corner in the town inn where he could sleep. Step by step his life began to regain stability. Every evening after work James visited the bookstore. He enjoyed sitting by the window and talking with Ethan. They spoke about books and about life. Ethan introduced him to stories he had never read. Through these conversations James began to find hope again. He realized that kindness could rebuild a broken soul. Months passed and James saved enough money to rent a small room instead of sleeping at the inn. He also learned the skills of baking and soon became trusted by the baker. The townspeople started recognizing him as part of their community. They respected his hardworking nature and welcomed him warmly. All of this had begun with one small act of kindness from Ethan. Yet Ethan never saw himself as a hero. He continued living his simple life at the bookstore. He did not seek recognition. But James often reminded him that a small gesture had changed his path entirely. He said that had Ethan ignored him on that first day, he might have collapsed on the road and given up hope. The friendship between the two men grew stronger. They supported each other in moments of struggle. When Ethan fell ill one winter, James brought him warm meals and stayed by his side until he recovered. When James faced doubts about his future, Ethan encouraged him with words drawn from the wisdom of books. The town itself began to notice this bond. People admired the way two strangers had become like brothers through compassion. The story spread quietly among neighbors who told their children about the importance of helping others. Soon small acts of kindness multiplied in the town. A child offered his toy to another who had none. A merchant reduced the price for a poor customer. An old woman shared her soup with a hungry traveler. The spirit of giving grew because one man had once shared bread and water with another. As the seasons changed, the memory of that first day remained alive in James's heart. He often returned to that chair by the window in the bookstore where it had all begun. He would sit in silence and think of how fragile life can be and how a single smile or gesture can alter its course. He promised himself that whenever he met someone in need he would do the same. Thus a circle of kindness began that continued to expand far beyond what Ethan had imagined. What had started as a simple act inside a small bookstore had grown into a force that touched many lives. And though Ethan considered it ordinary, the truth was that his small kindness had indeed changed a stranger's life forever. Winter slowly gave way to spring and the town came alive with colors once again. Blossoms appeared on the trees that lined the square and fresh scents floated through the air. Life moved forward in its ordinary rhythm, yet within that ordinary rhythm extraordinary transformations were taking place. Ethan continued his quiet routine at the bookstore while James became more skilled at the bakery. The two men met often in the evenings, sharing thoughts and dreams. One evening James sat at the wooden table inside the bakery counting the coins he had earned that day. Though his savings were small, they represented hope. He thought back to the time when he had arrived in the town with nothing in his pockets and despair in his heart. He remembered how Ethan had offered him water and bread and how that simple gesture had opened a new path. He felt that it was now his duty to pass that same kindness forward. The chance arrived sooner than expected. A few weeks later a boy entered the bakery. He looked no older than 12. His clothes were torn and his face showed the weariness of hunger. He stood quietly near the counter watching the loaves of bread with longing eyes. James noticed him at once. He walked over and asked gently if the boy needed anything. The boy hesitated, then whispered that he had not eaten since the day before. He explained that his mother was sick and that he had been wandering the streets looking for work to earn a little food. James felt his heart ache. He remembered his own journey of despair and how Ethan had saved him. Without a second thought he handed the boy a loaf of bread still warm from the oven. The boy's eyes widened with gratitude. He took the bread carefully as if holding treasure. James then gave him a bowl of soup and invited him to sit by the fire. As the boy ate he began to talk. His name was Oliver. He and his mother had come from a distant village after their home had been destroyed in a flood. They had found shelter in a small hut at the edge of the town, yet life had been harsh. His mother's health grew worse each day and he had no one to turn to. James listened with patience and compassion. He felt as though fate had placed Oliver before him to remind him of the promise he had made. He decided that he would not let this child suffer alone. After Oliver finished eating, James guided him to the bookstore. Ethan was arranging books when they entered. He looked up surprised to see the boy, then listened as James explained the situation. Ethan felt the same compassion that had once moved him to help James. He thought of how one act had changed a life and now another chance had appeared. He suggested that they visit the town healer to see what could be done for Oliver's mother. The three of them walked together through the quiet streets until they reached the healer's home. The healer examined the woman and provided her with herbs and instructions. Though her condition was serious, there was hope if she rested and received care. James and Ethan promised to help. Over the next few weeks they visited her, often bringing food and medicine. Oliver began spending time at the bakery helping James with simple tasks. In return he received meals and a small allowance. Slowly the woman's health improved. She was able to walk again and even managed to do light work. Oliver smiled more often and his eyes regained the brightness of childhood. The bond between him, James, and Ethan grew strong. The townspeople noticed and once again the spirit of kindness spread among them. Neighbors helped each other more freely. Children played together sharing toys. Even travelers passing through the town spoke of the warmth they felt. One evening as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan, James and Oliver sat together outside the bookstore. The street was calm and a gentle breeze carried the scent of blooming flowers. They spoke about how their lives had changed. Ethan reflected on the moment he had first met James. James spoke about the day Oliver had entered the bakery. Oliver listened quietly, then said that he wanted to grow up and help others in the same way. He said that kindness was like a flame that could light many lamps without ever losing its own brightness. Ethan smiled at these words. He realized that the story was complete. What had begun with one act had now become a circle. He had helped James. James had helped Oliver. And one day Oliver would help someone else. The circle would continue long after they were gone. Years later the town still remembered the tale of how kindness spread from one heart to another. People told their children about Ethan the bookseller who gave water to a weary traveler. They spoke of James the baker who gave bread to a hungry boy. They spoke of Oliver who grew into a strong man devoted to helping others. The story became part of the town's identity. As for Ethan, he continued to live humbly surrounded by books. He never sought fame or wealth, yet he carried within him the quiet joy of knowing that his small gesture had grown into something greater than himself. James found peace in his work and in the community that had accepted him. Oliver grew up with courage and kindness guiding his steps. The story ended not with a grand event but with a simple truth. A small act of kindness can change a life. It can ripple outward, touching countless hearts. It can create bonds where none existed before. And though the world may forget many deeds, it never forgets true compassion. Thus the circle of kindness continued beyond Ethan, James and Oliver. It lived in the hearts of the people and in the quiet moments when someone offered a smile or shared a meal or spoke a gentle word. The town thrived not because of wealth or power but because of kindness that flowed like a river, nourishing every soul it touched. And so the story came to its end, yet in truth it never ended at all. For kindness once given never dies. It lives on forever in those who receive it and in those who pass it forward.